In the last Liberty's Horizon session, I interviewed the remarkable Mark Gober. And Mark Gober is the author of a 7-part book series called The End of the Upside Down. And the 7-part book series is The End of the Upside Down Thinking, which won an IPPY award. The End of Upside Down Medicine, The End of Upside Down Cosmos, Upside Down Living, Upside Down Liberty, Upside Down Reset, Upside Down Contact. And each one of these books talks about the inversion of everything that we've been led to believe and the social engineering of all things historical, all things scientific, all things related to cosmology, science. It gets into the deeper sides, even talking about government and medicine, etc., how everything has been completely inverted in our awareness. So he illuminates that inversion and talks about or brings forth questions and curiosities about what things could really be. And in my opinion, I think this series should be mandatory reading for the new curriculum so we can understand what inversions look like, what social engineering looks like, so we don't make this mistake again. Just to give you some of his credentials, he served on the board of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He was a partner in the Sherpa Tech Group in Silicon Valley. He worked as an investment banker, named one of IM Strategy 300, and magna cum laude at Princeton, and so much more. Extraordinary man, extraordinary conversation. Welcome to Liberty's Horizon.
All right.
Mark Gober, good to see you, brother. Good to see you again. Thanks for taking some time out to share your genius so more people can hear about what you're bringing to the world and in your particular expression, which I felt very drawn to from the very first moment I ever saw you. I didn't really know who you were at all. And then I saw a presentation and I thought, shit, this guy's really got a particular lens to share to the world, a particular genius. It's just, it's so smart the way that you would take these, I'm just going to call them conspiratorial elements of what's really going on in the world and bring them forth in the way with the evidentiary research foundly behind it, right? And you just present it in such a smart way that it just drew me, and there was just a great alignment there. So it just felt right to have you on and for you to share.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation because you are so knowledgeable, and I am looking forward to learning from you too.
Yeah, thank you. That's absolutely going to happen. It takes a community. It takes a community. So, so I'm going to do something that I have done this before, but it's so super rare. I'm going to actually read your bio, because as I stated before, your bio is so badass that I really just want to read it. So give me a moment. I want to pull your bio up and read it. Okay, so Mark Gober is an author of the Upside Down series of 7 books exploring consciousness, liberty, economics, medicine, cosmology, and more. And his first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, this was in 2018, won the IPPY award for Best Science Book of the Year and earned endorsements from leading researchers. Mark also created the podcast Where Is My Mind, serves on the board of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I absolutely love, and is a Princeton graduate with a background in Silicon Valley strategy and Wall Street finance. So that's pretty diverse, really. You're covering a lot of ground. You have an interesting academic background. You have an interesting esoteric scientific background. And then you bring in the spiritual element, what I like to call grounded spiritual nature of what I call natural things, which I'm in full resonance with. So I'm kind of curious. I want to get into some of your bio stuff because I have some interests and some curiosities. But I'm very curious. Like, who are you? Like, where did you come from? What brought you into this path and brings you here today with what you share through your particular lens? How did that happen?
Well, the journey for me started with trying to achieve. And I tried to achieve in whatever domain I was working in, whether it was competitive tennis or grades or in the financial world. There was some challenge put in front of me and I wanted to win.
You're
And I
competitive.
didn't. Competitive, yeah. And I would say mostly competitive with myself. I mean, of
Mm,
course, in sports and finance, there's a competitive element with other people, but there are
sure.
standards that I have always had for myself and have been hard on myself in that process where anything below perfection is not allowed. So
The
that's
idea of
that's who
perfection.
you're dealing with here. Yes,
Awesome. I can kind of pick
that's
that up. Okay, cool. I love it. I like to call it um, excellence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't a bad thing, but it can be taken to a toxic level,
Yeah.
especially when there are attachments to outcomes
Yes, indeed. I get
versus
that. Yeah.
just versus just desiring an outcome and allowing it to be what it's going to be, being
Mhm.
fixated on something. There's a
Got it.
difference.
Right.
And that's something I've been trying to unwind. But that's who you're dealing with here, is someone who uh, put himself through very challenging circumstances over and over again. And at a certain point, it becomes difficult to do that without having a metaphysical container for why any of these things matter. Why do I exist? What is this world? Is life random? Is there meaning and purpose? If you had asked me this about 9 years ago, I would have said there is no meaning or purpose beyond what we make up in our own mind,
Hmm.
and life is fundamentally random. There's no spiritual force, no God. Religions and spiritual traditions are superstitions of the past because those older traditions didn't have the modern science that we now have, and we have now transcended the superstitions.
Got it. So
That's basically where I was.
you're a scientifically atheist.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Makes sense. I get it.
Given what I was exposed to, that made complete sense.
So
And
what was that? So
yeah.
what was that? Like, what were you exposed to that brings you into that and brought you into that
Mhm.
box that you clearly found your way out of? What was that box?
Number one, I'd say mainstream education.
Oh, right.
Then going into the world of finance in New York and Silicon
Mm,
Valley,
mm,
I was exposed to mainstream thinking as if that represented the height of all progress.
right. Yes. Yeah.
And I had no reason to question that. More so, I had no time to question that. I
Yeah.
was so busy that there wasn't any forcing function that was going to make me reevaluate until, I don't know, I could point to different eras, but in 2016 I was really at a low point where I felt like I was a zombie. There were things in my professional life, personal life that weren't going the way that I wanted, and I didn't have the same stamina to withstand it that I might have had 10 years earlier. It
Mm,
was an accumulation of running on the treadmill, not going anywhere, not knowing why any of it mattered. So I was totally lost. And it led me to start listening to podcasts. Initially, some buddies would send podcasts. I remember the first one, I think it was the first one. A friend sent me a Tim Ferriss episode with a venture capitalist, and I just got to listen to them talk for hours because back then in 2016, podcasts were somewhat newer. I
yeah.
said, this is pretty cool. You can listen to interesting people talk. And then I heard people talk about um, psychology and how to alleviate anxiety and things like that, whether it was through psychedelics or sensory deprivation tanks. And then I started to listen to alternative medical podcasts, people healing themselves outside of the allopathic system. And
Mm,
there was clearly an interest that I was developing of, okay, there's something that I can do outside the office beyond just work on my business deals or hang out with my friends. Like there's something else, some other passion project. And it led me to a podcast called Extreme Health Radio, where after listening to many episodes, the next one up happened to be with a woman named Laura Powers,
mm,
who is a professional psychic. And she
mm,
works with energies and interdimensional beings like angels.
mm.
She was speaking about this on a podcast that I thought was otherwise credible. So I was very confused because the hosts were taking her seriously, and I had never heard of anyone talking about these topics in a serious way. So I ended up listening to Laura's own podcast after hearing that episode. It's called Healing Powers, and I binged it. I listened to every episode from 2016 back to 2011 because it was person after person, someone communicating with the dead, someone talking about astrology, all these areas. And I'm like, what is going on here? I don't know anyone in my circles who subscribes to these spiritual perspectives, and they've never had these direct experiences. Are all these people that I'm listening to crazy? Am I crazy for listening to them? Then I started to look at the science, looking at the US government's declassified documents on remote viewing, which is the ability to see something with the mind that's far away in space and or time, peer-reviewed journal papers on the science of telepathy, mind-matter interaction, precognition, near-death experiences, all these phenomena. And then I was coming across medical doctors and PhDs who were writing books on this stuff. And my mind was blown because I couldn't reconcile this overwhelming amount of seemingly credible evidence with what I thought was a pretty good education. And then I started working with psychics and energy healers and doing all kinds of alternative diets. And sometimes people could do things that I couldn't explain, or they would know things that I could not explain. And my life became much more mystical. Synchronicities happening that were beyond chance when I ran the statistics in my mind. Like, how could that same thing appear 5 times and then in a few days? Things like that were happening over and over again. And long story short, my life has unraveled since then. It feels like that period in 2016 was the death of an old self. I think there were many deaths of old selves, but that was a big one. And this is part of the rebirth process for me, starting with The Science of Consciousness, which is my first book, and Into Upside Down Thinking. That came a year. I wrote the book a year after this initial exploration. So I wrote it in the summer of 2017.
Oh,
And it was published in 2018, but I didn't know I was going to be writing a book when I first started researching. I was just curious. And then I got an insight one day. I said, why don't you put this research into a book? And anyone who's known me for a long time would know that writing was not something that I sought out. I never wanted to be an author.
I can relate to
and
that.
So I wrote that book, and I thought, okay, that's my book. And this is really important. I wrote about the idea that consciousness does not come from the brain, that our brain might be like an antenna receiver or some kind of filtering mechanism. And there's a spiritual reality beyond that we are tapping into, meaning we have to rethink our identity. That was totally mind-blowing to me. And I wrote a book about that, the scientific evidence, challenging the conventional view that consciousness somehow pops out of a brain, even though no one has ever observed that. They've only observed correlations between brain functioning and conscious experience. Correlations, not necessarily causation. And that's a whole other topic. But I went deep in that, obsessed, wrote the book, became a partner at my firm in Silicon Valley, still wanted to research and learn. And the desire to try to align with this reality wasn't going away. It was intensifying. I produced a podcast series with Blue Duck Media on the same topic in 2019 called Where Is My Mind? And it's still out there on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's like an 8-episode docuseries that anyone can binge. But that was a double click and a different way to present the same material. So that took me to the end of 2019. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was still at my firm where I had spent a whole career's worth to make it to this partner role. In my early 30s, I was in a good spot. And I said, I don't want to do this anymore. So I decided to tell my business partners that I was leaving the firm, not knowing what I would do next. And this was right before everything happened in 2020. Consciously, I didn't know that. Maybe there was some part of me. The timing is very curious. And long story short, when everything happened in 2020, I started to question political authority, the medical system, the media. And now there's a series of 7 books. It's not just about consciousness. It's about the nature of government and economics and UFOs, aliens and spirits and medicine, cosmology, and lots of other topics.
Thank you. So a couple things pop up for me, and I want to take a note of one thing. You said the nature of government, and I want to get back to that in just a moment. Incredible story, by the way, and not terribly unsimilar to my own. I also went pretty deep down the rabbit hole. I was kind of explaining before we kind of hit record, just to share a little bit more about some of my deeper history of learning, meeting William Cooper, and actually that's one of my first like big books that I went into in regards to understanding conspiratorial things, where it put into words the things that I was seeing and feeling. but when I moved past that space of when I saw what I call the grand inequity, and I got mad, and then anger filled my heart, I realized that that wasn't where I needed to be. So I went down the rabbit hole of consciousness, and I actually became familiar with the Institute of Noetic Science, and down the rabbit hole became a very prominent series that I watched, and I dissected all the interviews in the back, and I dissected all the teachers that were part of that, and just opened up a whole world. Joe Dispenza, of course, was in that, and Dr. Bruce Lipton, right? Epigenetics. A whole world opened up to me, and I really deeply appreciate what you were sharing in there. And in the earlier part, your what you were saying, you'd mentioned something about it was institutionalized education that kind of put you into a box. And what hit me really hard when you said that is something that I often share with people, is that the mind doesn't make a good master. Our heart is the true intelligence, and through my understanding and awareness, our heart has the answers of truth if we would just learn to trust it and lean in and listen and learn. And our mind is designed to be the supporter of the intelligence. So they work together, but the mind is not designed to be a master, because the mind can be manipulated.
Mhm.
So our education system is all designed to get us trapped up in our minds, get us over intellectualized into matters that can be manipulated away with statistics and data and all kinds of ways of twisting information. And then we're rewarded for it. We're rewarded for all that information. So we get stuck in our head through this high minded world of academia, and we're moved away from our connection with God, removed away from our connections of higher consciousness, moved away from our connection with our intelligence of our heart. So that's what I hear. That's what goes on for me, my experience when you're sharing that with me. And you've kind of gone through this massive wave, and you've come out the other side in this whole sort of victorious way. So how did you find your way into noetic science? I have a great deal of respect for that
Mm.
organization.
I was asked to join the board in 2019. This
Oh,
was
really?
after my first book came out, which was very much in alignment with the research that's done at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I lived in Northern California at the time, which was not far away from their headquarters, was invited to some of their events. And when they invited me, I said yes.
Simple enough.
Hmm.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
So, what else have you done in regards to noetic science? Like, what have you contributed to that, and what has it contributed back to you? Like, where's the orientation there, the deeper orientation?
Yeah. One of the reasons I felt so compelled to support the organization is that when I first started researching the science of consciousness, I couldn't believe that an organization existed since 1973 studying these phenomena scientifically. And it's very challenging to make it into mainstream peer-reviewed journals. There are a few slipping through the cracks these days, but many journals will refuse papers on the basis of the subject matter alone, because if it suggests that the mind can exist outside the brain, or if psychic phenomena are real, a journal might say, we're not going to even look at this. This is not something that's going to go in our journal. But there are some alternative journals that accept these papers. And I was so impressed with the library of research that existed.
Mm.
Dr. Dean Radin, for example, and many others. It shifted my perspective. It was one of a few key inputs giving credibility to the science of a spiritual reality.
Hmm.
So I will be forever grateful to that research, and it's an honor to be on the inside of the organization working with the scientists and see the way that they conduct studies and try to make that information available to more people. Because for someone like me who came up with a traditional institutionalized academic background, having that level of research matters. For other people, it doesn't matter at all. Some people, maybe they'll do DMT or have a near-death experience or meditate for hours and they have some profound experience and they don't need research. For someone like me, I needed it. I needed
Mm.
to see the peer review and decades worth.
Mm.
And IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS for short, has been a huge contributor to that.
Well, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. There's a local Swami here who's part of the lineage of Yogananda, and we've become friends. And he's often talked about the differentiations of people, and some people need the assistance of things like the data, and there's some people that feel it and know it and they trust it, and that's just what makes the world so interesting and dynamic. In the way that somebody who needs data, it's not going to work for the ones who can see it and feel it and know it differently. And that's a whole nother element of noetic science, really. It's like, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's something that we talk about at the Institute is how can a paradigm shift occur? Some people, the scientific papers matter. For other people, it's experiential.
Yeah.
What's the best way to communicate this information so that it's palatable? What types of research should we be looking at going forward?
Yeah.
And so these are the things we think about a lot.
So you'd mentioned something about the nature of government. I think that's what you said. That's either, is that one of your books or just a piece of one of your books? And I'm kind of curious, what is that?
Yeah. There's a book I wrote called An End to Upside Down Liberty. It's the third book in the series, published in 2021. That is explicitly about how should we organize society, which is another way of saying what's the nature of governance, governing, government. Another one of my books, An End to the Upside Down Reset, talks about the World Economic Forum's explicitly stated plan for society, not a conspiracy. It's something that anyone can read. And that gets into the nature of government as well. And as my book
can be happy.
Exactly. But I would say that the nature of government and the freedom or enslavement of humanity has been a topic that is a through line throughout my later books in particular, whether I'm talking about government explicitly or not.
So I'm just going to throw this little plug in here for some of you that may watch this, that may know the work that I do in the world. I'm the founding director of Sacred Honor Educational Fellowship, and one of the seminal course series we have is called The Foundation for Self-Governance. And it helps, first of all, break the spell. We've got a documentary called Breaking the Spell. It's 1 hour and 4 minutes, and it helps break down and distill all these complex matters into the simple awareness that the system works. The system of dominance works through commerce and contracts. So we break that down evidentially, historically, and then you've got a foundation, and then we go into the foundation for self-governance and teaches you how you can build your life in the what we call the private ledger, or the world of all natural, the world of divine jurisdiction, of constitutional protections, this natural world, and how you can manage your life with the public world, the corporate world, the United States federal corporation world, which is different than the United States of America, the Republic. You learn those distinctions and how you can work in that world with a lot more power, because you realize that we are actually the currency of the system. So, kind of in lines. Oh, and there'll be some links down below, by the way, of some of Mark's material, some of his books, whatever sites and stuff you want to share, and also the Sacred Honor Educational Fellowship if you want to watch Breaking the Spell or learn more about self-governance. So it kind of fits into the nature of governance, which is different than government. So what kind of led you into that space itself, and how deep of a rabbit hole did you go down for that segment?
It was a book that surprised me very much, because up to that point I'd written An End to Upside Down Thinking about the nature of consciousness, then An End to Upside Down Liberty, which is really about spiritual awakening and how to think about living life with a new perspective. Up until 2020, I was apolitical or non-political. I didn't care about politics and I didn't know about politics. If you had asked me to define the differences between a Democrat and a Republican, I probably would have done a very poor job. I just didn't care at all. The only things that mattered to me were forms of legislation that affected my business. Right. But I wasn't looking at left versus right. I didn't care. And then 2020 happened, and all of a sudden I had to care, because the world, as we remember, was divided and continues to be so divided. Yeah. But I was finding that a lot of the people that I agreed with in terms of spiritual philosophy and the nature of consciousness were agreeing with what I considered to be oppressive measures in terms of censorship and in terms of government control during the 2020 era and beyond. So I was immensely confused, because I thought with these two books, I didn't have it fully figured out, but basically this is the direction we need to be moving in. And then many of the people that agreed with that stuff were pushing for tyranny. So I was blown away. It's still something I try to grapple with. I mean, there's something I referenced in my talk at Confluence, I believe I did, Ken Wilber's work. He talks about lines of development, that you could be really developed in one way, but not another way, waking up cleaning up, growing up, and showing up. And I think that framework is very helpful, because you could have someone super awakened in one way, but maybe they haven't done the internal work. It's another story. But I was forced to look at government during 2020 because I wanted to understand where do I stand in this stuff, because I was siding with the freedom-minded people pretty quickly in the spring of 2020. I saw the censorship happening, and I was looking at the alternative media. And then I started to look at the injections and things like that. But what I realized was that I saw tyranny on both sides, the right and the left. I tended to be most critical of the left, and one of my books, An End to the Upside Down Reset, breaks down the psychology of leftism, which I feel particularly sensitized to, because it masquerades as being compassionate, and yet it's tyrannical.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the spectrum, there is its own form of tyranny. It's the government is doing something that it believes is correct, that side believes is correct, and it's imposing it on people that might not want it. So I was forced to look into alternative ways of thinking about government. And that led me to what's known as voluntarism, or anarcho-capitalism, or anarchism. This is the idea, not that there shouldn't be rules, but that there shouldn't be rulers. And that everything that is happening in society under the guise of government or under its dominion could be done in the private sector. You don't need to have a public sector that's doing these things. It's just human beings within government performing important functions. Why do they have to be within this political monopoly? And it led me to the work of Larkin Rose, his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, the work of Murray Rothbard. For example, he wrote For a New Liberty, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Ludwig von Mises, the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, where I've actually spoken, the Austrian School of Economics. So this book, An End to Upside Down Liberty, is making the case against government as a political monopoly, not against the functions, because people might want to have security or some kind of a system to handle disputes, like a court system, but does it have to be done within the political monopoly? And I make the case that actually doing so is in alignment with spiritual principles. The non-aggression principle aligns with the golden rule. And to me, the golden rule is built into the fabric of reality. We see that in many phenomena like the near-death experience, which is a whole other topic. So I tie in the science of consciousness to political and economic theory and say, look, we're doing it totally wrong. I know there's another layer to this, which is extracting oneself from the system, which we've tacitly agreed to. I know much less about this, and I know Alex Zeck and others have been looking into it, but it's not something that I feel qualified to speak much about. So that book, An End to Upside Down Liberty, kind of stops there. It says we need to just think about government differently, and I do that a bit in An End to the Upside Down Reset as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So coming from my lens and what we share at the fellowship is the original organic constitution. I say the original organic is because there's more than one constitution. They rewrote a corporate constitution after the Civil War. So that's something to learn and look into. But the original organic constitution was originally designed to limit the legislative powers of government or Congress so that people could remain in self-governance. So that system, that governing system, was really designed to do very minimal things. Have, a protective force, reasonably manage, certain affairs, and, deal with systems of justice, which primarily was navigated through the states. So they really had not much of a role at all. It was mostly about how the states governed and how the people governed themselves in their local communities. So I actually would look forward to converging our minds and share much more about what we do from your stopping point forward. And I'd love to go back into what brought you into your stopping point. We're going to be releasing a book, maybe the second quarter of next year, called The Foundation for Self-Governance. And it's going to have all the breaking the spell and then the different solutions for people to where they can find their way in the self-governance. And part of that self-governance is how you decide you want to navigate exchange, right? And we have cryptos, we've got gold, we have whatever it is that you decide you want to exchange. It's really none of the government's business. Right. It's not their business at all. So it's a reorientation. It's a complete reorientation.
And it's a challenging one. It was a very difficult paradigm shift for me to accept when I first came across it. We grew up believing that government is there to protect us, versus looking at the government as a predator. Yes. in the current manifestation. And that it applies to all government, because it's a compulsory political monopoly. And that means without an explicitly and mutually agreed upon contract where the two parties are sitting across from each other and saying, this is what I want.
Right.
where that's what you do in the business world. I mean, my company, if we were hired, we would sit down and write a contract where the client knew exactly what they were getting from us, and we knew what the pricing structure was and how you could terminate it. We don't have that with government. I know there might be some implied contracts, and that's the world that you know much more about than I do.
Invisible contracts, yeah.
Yes, or things that we've agreed to and didn't realize it. And I know birth certificates, there's a whole other realm here. But what I'm trying to make clear in that book is that government is inherently predatory, even if it masquerades as something that is supposed to be beneficial. So that was a massive paradigm shift for me. And then it became the hardest of my books to publish. My publisher has been great, by the way. Waterside Productions, they've accepted all of my books, and I give them a ton of credit for that, because they just out of nowhere get a manuscript for me, and I'm writing about these crazy topics, and they've stuck with me. But I mean, the hardest to publish in that the amount of stress that it caused me, because number one, it was scary. I'd never written a political book to really challenge the nature of government. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I knew I would lose people, especially people on the left. I knew I'd lose people on the right too, but the people on the right tend to be a little bit more open-minded. Even if they don't fully agree, they'll entertain many of the principles. But a lot of the people that I knew in my network and the people that supported my first two books, to them, this was absolutely crazy talk. This is Nazi stuff, which is, to me, outrageous. But that was the reaction I did get from some people. I lost a lot, and it's a lesson for me. And I've had to do this more and more as my books have gotten more controversial, which is that if I feel like I can make a good argument that's logical and backed with research, and I'm bringing together expert opinions, and I have experts reviewing the books, like my book, An End to Upside Down Medicine, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Dr. Mark Bailey read those books. Dr. Stephen A. Young read my book on cosmology before it was published. Economist Walter Block read my book on An End to Upside Down Liberty, which is getting into the Austrian school, and he's one of the preeminent economists. So I do have people looking at this stuff, and if I feel like I can make a good case, I've got to put it out there. I have a spiritual responsibility to do so, even if people don't like it. And that's my evolutionary journey.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty rich. So the question I have is, or what comes up for me is so after you released this book, how was it really received? Like it got kicked out. Your publisher was maybe apprehensive, and then I guess, were you saying they were a little apprehensive?
No, my publisher has been great. They've supported me with it. I was apprehensive.
You were apprehensive. So
yes.
how was it received? You know, we have to get out of the mindset of who we think we want to receive it, but who received it and how was it received?
The irony with my journey is it feels like not many people are reading or my books or hearing my message. I mean, I know the numbers with the books, they're not huge.
Okay.
So there's a limited audience. And then among the people who do read the book, I don't hear from the majority of them. It's hard to tell sometimes how things are received. Of course, there are a few people that will reach out, or someone who's very happy or very angry, and I get that with every book. And there were a few with the Liberty book, but I was a bit surprised. It was pretty quiet, and all the books have been super quiet. And so I don't know if I'm just being ignored. I don't have the distribution other people have. I'm also not doing it in a combative way. I'm talking about subjects that are controversial, but I try not to point fingers as much as possible. I try to state things objectively and not get too emotionally charged with it, because even within the truther community, we see major divides among people who agree on 99% of the things. And the 1% where they disagree, they're calling each other names, and it turns into middle school banter. I don't want to get involved in that. And maybe that's why it's been quiet for me.
Well, I think you're coming from more of a academic, honorable space of wanting to share with people truth instead of trying to make it an emotional, controversial matter just to get attention for people to be aware of it. So I appreciate that. To me, it's probably one of those books that I do have a pretty vast library, and there's some of the books I've had in my library. I've had in my library for 25 years, and they didn't become more recognized until 25 years later, right? They came off the shelves when an event happened and something brought an awareness to a book that brought it forward. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need a new curriculum. We have to just either completely get rid of the public school and public indoctrination system, and we need to draft new curriculums. as part of something I'm doing well behind the scenes is being in that process of developing new curriculum that we bring into these new communities that are developing in the parallel society. So I'd say that the material that you draft becomes part of that information for the new curriculums. Just putting it out there.
Thank you for saying that. I have had a few mothers reach out to me and tell me that my books are part of the curriculum for their children.
There you go. So that's a starting point. There's definitely a spark in there. It is our duty. It is, what I do in the world, maybe it's going to find its way into deeper reception, maybe 5 or 6 or 8, 9 years down the road. All we can do is build that foundation. That's the foundation of truth, the foundation of honor, foundation that is built on actuality, and it will find its way into truth. It will find its way into light, for sure.
Going back to my earlier point of not being attached to outcomes, my
Right.
older self would have said, if you don't have this many sales, it's a failure. I
Yeah.
don't look at it that way now. To me, if I put out a product that I feel good about, then I'm done. And how
Yeah.
the book does, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, I love having these conversations and spreading the word, but a lot of the stuff to me in my internal space is old news. I'm numb to it. It doesn't have a wow factor for me. And I'm also not here to change people's minds, because I've seen and tried. If someone doesn't want to change, they will not. But
So
putting the information out, it gives them an ability to change if they want to.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's there for them to, everyone's on their own journey. People are finding their way. They're just finding their way. And you found your way. You have a whole different perception now that you didn't have, even 6 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So in that perception, something else that comes up for me, as you are clearly aware and you've observed in your own surrounding and your own friends, I also was very heavily steeped in the liberal community. Even though I've been very aware of what's going on, they're really good. The whole world deception is very good at tugging at our emotions, and there's a lot of confusions there. So I've been in my own journey of kind of getting sucked down these rabbit holes just to find my way back out of them again. And there's smart people in the world, very smart people in the world. And just because you're very smart doesn't necessarily mean that you can see necessarily what's going on around you. Just like you were saying that Ken Wilber's, levels of awareness as we grow and what we're able to see. So you're one of those people. You're clearly very intelligent. You're very smart. To me, there's a difference: intelligence and smart. You have the combination. You've been able to merge the combination, and that's what I feel helps you see the deeper truth and what you bring in the world. So the question I have for you is somebody who is smart, somebody who's academically smart, somebody who's was kind of embedded in the liberal element as well, or whatever you want to call that. Um, how was it for your own being? Like, how was it for you when you really started seeing the cracks in the veneer? Because you said you had experiences, you saw things, and you couldn't. You're like what the fuck moments, right? So how did you deal with that?
At first, it was very challenging and isolating. I had no one to talk to except the spiritual healers that I started to hire, basically, to help me and to guide me through the process. Eventually, I started to talk to friends, and I would, over brunch in San Francisco, I would mention some studies I came across.
Mm.
And I'd talk about physics and entanglement and things like that. And people, for the most part, were very interested. And some people I remember would say, maybe a week after we had dinner, they'd be like, I'm still thinking about what we talked about. Mind blowing. So I was getting good feedback overall. I do remember I had one friend who I appreciate this. He was looking out for me, but he read the first draft of my book, An End to Upside Down Thinking. And he pulled me aside and said, we need to talk. You cannot publish this book, Mark. I'm your friend, and people are going to think you're nuts. Talking about the science of the afterlife and psychic phenomena. So there was that reaction, and the isolation that comes with that, of people who didn't necessarily want to engage. I remember I was asking, well, so tell me what's the problem here? Because there are hundreds of citations. And one of his answers was that the statistical evidence was too strong. It must have been fake.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. I can sadly see that logic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember also that year, 2016, Thanksgiving, I decided to go into Muir Woods by myself and not be with friends or family. I needed to just sit with what was happening, because I was drinking out of a fire hose. I went all in quickly.
Mm.
Basically, every minute when I wasn't in the office, I was reading and researching this stuff. And the more I learned, the more I realized I couldn't discount every piece of evidence I was coming across. So that it led to a form of isolation. And what I found more recently is that there's community building around people who are asking questions. But for a while, up until maybe 2 years ago, even, it felt more and more isolating as I was questioning government and then questioning allopathic medicine, all these, all these things. Actually, when I started questioning allopathic medicine is when I found community even more. But there have been long periods of feeling isolated and periods of weeding out some people who don't want to hang with me anymore, and then finding the ones who do. Because with each book, I lose new people.
Yeah. What was and I'm sorry, you might have said this earlier. What was that first crack in the veneer?
There were multiple. If I had to say at first, it was listening to Laura Powers on Extreme Health Radio.
Okay.
But even within her podcast, Healing Powers, which I then listened to dozens of people talk, there were some that affected me more than others. One was an interview with Paul Davids, who, like me, was a Princeton grad, psychology major, and he was working on a documentary called The Life After Death Project. And he's a Hollywood producer, produced the Transformers and some big time stuff. He's on Laura Powers' podcast talking about the Life After Death Project because his colleague in Hollywood was an atheist and said to him, if I die before you, I don't think anything's going to happen. But if there is an afterlife, I'll drop you a line. So
right. I love that.
His colleague did die, and then very strange things happened. And Paul did this documentary, wrote a book called An Atheist in Heaven, documented, I believe it was around 300 anomalies, one of which was he was at home alone, reading through some papers, left the room, and came back and found that there was wet ink crossing out certain words on the page. He did not put the wet ink there, and no one else was in the home. So he had this ink analyzed by chemistry labs, and there were strange properties of the ink, and the words that were crossed out corresponded to his deceased colleague. This was one of many anomalies that he spoke of. So I remember listening to that, and I couldn't move in my chair because I'm sitting there looking around. Are there spirits that I can't see? And this was after having heard other people too. So it's like there are these threshold moments that had a big effect on me. And that was one, but there have been many in the journey.
Kind of reminds me of Interstellar. Yeah, I'm sure you watched that film. Pretty fascinating as he's going into a black hole and he finds himself into this space to where he's actually looking back at himself, and now he's sending messages to his future self, or whatever, if you want to call it a timeline. And that's an interesting idea, possibility that our higher self is actually us in some other future dimensional space or timeline that's actually sending messages to us to help guide us along. I appreciate and love all of this spiritual philosophical potentiality, and I've had a lot of extraordinary experiences myself that science can't explain. What we call traditional science. Have met a lot of amazing people, hearing great stories from you. Definitely feel like we have a compadreness here that we probably should open the door a little bit further.
Yeah.
I've been going down this realm for many years. And it's just a normal part of my life now. It's not something that just comes out when I meet somebody that I resonate with. It's just part of my life. It's how I lead. It's how I talk. It's just my truth. I can tell that it's yours too. And that naturally helps us find our tribe. We stay true to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the next thing on your horizon? Where are you now? What are you up to?
My latest book came out about a year ago called An End to the Upside Down Cosmos. And I'm not working on another book, and I don't feel called to be researching one. So I don't quite know what's next. I mean, what has been the consistent thread since 2016 has been a spiritual journey, a journey within myself to undo whatever old programs I have, whatever subconscious beliefs I still have that are harmful, traumas, mini traumas, who knows what, that is still unpurified within myself. That's an ongoing journey.
Right.
And what I found is that life seems to bring us the things that will help us purify or suffer, basically. And we have a choice.
We have a choice. My friend, a very dear friend, brilliant friend, who's no longer with us in this particular dimension, used to say very often that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So I want to, just for people that might check this out, um, I want to make sure that as clearly as possible, how can people find your material? So website, maybe break down your books again in a concise order so people are a little bit more oriented to the body of work that you put together.
Sure. Well, before I do that, all of the books are available on Amazon in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats. And I narrated all the audibles myself, but my website has a summary of everything. It's markgober.com, markgober.com. And my podcast series, which I mentioned, Where is My Mind? It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the other major players. But just to go through a summary of the books quickly, the first one, An End to Upside Down Thinking, is about dispelling the myth that the brain is what produces our consciousness. And that involves looking at the science of psychic phenomena and the science of the afterlife, near-death experiences, children with past life memories, studied at the University of Virginia for many decades, mediumship, telepathy, all that stuff. The things that we hear about in the telepathy tapes, the very popular podcast now, Dr. Diane Powell, she was on my podcast, Where is My Mind? I talk about her in my early book as well. So that sort of thing is in there. Second book, An End to Upside Down Liberty, An End to Upside Down Living. This was published in 2020 after I left my firm. And it goes through answering a question that I start the book with. What is the overall intention of your life? That's what I asked the reader. And I seek to answer that question for myself in the book, looking at the science of consciousness and also looking at spiritual philosophy and the spiritual awakening journey. So it's a more practical book of, well, what do I do if it's true that consciousness does not come from my brain and I'm some kind of vehicle or vessel for a higher intelligence, a soul, whatever? What do I do? How do I think about approaching life? How should I orient my compass? That's the book, An End to Upside Down Living. Then there's An End to Upside Down Liberty, which, as we discussed, makes the case against statism, which is the way we do government around the world, a compulsory political monopoly, which I'll just go through this logic very quickly. I love to throw it in because the case for government is inherently self-defeating, because most people, if you ask them, why do we need to have a government, they'd say that, well, people are too stupid and irresponsible and warlike. Therefore, we need to have this power to keep us in check. The problem is that if you assume those things about human nature, the logic destroys itself, because government, the administrators within government are selected within the pool of people that you just said you didn't trust. And then the people that you don't trust are electing those people into power within the political monopoly, and the people you don't trust are running the elections. So how can you trust any of it? And people will say, but no, we need to have this body. There's a loss of logic there. So yes, that's something for your audience to think about. And I talk about not only that, but also the Austrian School of Economics and tying in natural law and spiritual philosophy with government and economics.
I'm actually very excited to read that book. So thanks for picking it apart a bit more.
You're welcome. Then there's An End to Upside Down Contact, which is about UFOs, aliens, and spirits. It is a discussion of allegations that we're not alone, that there are non-human intelligences. It's broken down into two segments, basically. One is contact phenomena that are not related to UFOs, meaning people who encounter spiritual entities in psychedelic trips, near-death experiences, channeling, all that stuff. That's contact. And then, of course, there are UFO-related phenomena that have been discussed throughout history. Abduction phenomena, studied by John Mack, who was the head of psychiatry at Harvard. Pulitzer Prize winner, studied alien abductions and the types of entities that people claim they've encountered repeatedly. Gray aliens, reptilian beings, praying mantis, giant mantises, insectoid beings. This stuff is being reported not only in the modern era, but also throughout history. So I take a look at some of the ancient lore and different traditions, and don't make too many definitive conclusions, but I think there's enough there for the reader to say, okay, a lot's going on here, and there are other intelligences involved, and perhaps it's a spiritual war, because not all these intelligences are benevolent.
Absolutely. I'm going to sideline for just a moment. Again, you, as you're going through contextual information and you're gaining more galvanized information that we're not alone, and there's definitely more here than this physical body. There's you ever read the DMT, the spirit molecule?
Yes, I quote
Right.
it in the book.
Oh, you did? Okay. And then the studies that he did back in the 90s, where one of the common experiences when they were in the high doses of pure DMT is that they would have experiences with grays. I think that's exactly the word they used, grays. And they described them in the experience that they had consistently. And one of the messages was, glad you finally learned how to travel or something to that degree, right?
What
Consistently.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Rick Strassman decided to stop the study was that people were being exposed to entities. And to paraphrase, he felt an ethical obligation to say, is this safe to expose people to
Right.
this stuff? Because in the studies, they were measuring physiology, like what happens to the body and the heart rate. I hope I'm getting this right, but basic measures. And then there were also transcripts of what people reported.
Yeah.
So Dr. Strassman was forced, because of what people were saying, to look at the abduction phenomenon. And it wasn't something he was familiar with. Interestingly, John Mack from Harvard, who later studied this abduction phenomenon, endorsed Rick Strassman's book, because what Strassman was hearing in the DMT studies is what John Mack was hearing among people who were not taking DMT. There was a commonality in the reports of these alleged abductions and the things that happened to people.
Right. So I have experienced exorcisms. Actually, I've experienced an exorcism in an ayahuasca ceremony, one of the most profound experiences I ever had. And why I caution people about just flagrantly or irresponsibly navigating things like dimethyltryptamine without somebody who's experienced container holder and who can actually help navigate you through these spiritual realms. Because when you open yourself up to these potentialities of this consciousness, etheric, whatever it is, you can draw in entities, you can be taken over, you can be abducted by something. The word abduction can mean a lot of different things. You can be taken over by something. I've witnessed it happen. I've seen it be extracted out of people. I can sense it and see it in people at this point in my life. What you're saying is very true and very real. And I had forgotten about that part of Rick when he said, I stopped doing these studies because I had an ethical responsibility, because I don't know what I'm really doing here on the higher side of things. So I think that's an important matter to highlight. So thanks for bringing that forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the book, An End to Upside Down Contact. To me,
Okay.
hopefully it's thought provoking, but it's difficult to draw conclusions other than there's a lot of weird stuff going on.
Yeah. A lot of weird shit.
And it's important. I wrote it after the Liberti book because I was so confused about the darkness I saw starting in 2020, the amount of suppression and coordinated tyranny. Are we in a spiritual war? And what are the forces involved? That was some question I was asking. And I mentioned it only briefly in the Liberti book. I tie in that spiritual question. And then the Contact book, An End to Upside Down Contact, takes it to another level of exploring what's a survey of what's been done on contact with non-human intelligences in the modern era and throughout human history, or the reports of human history. The next book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, breaks down the World Economic Forum's vision for society and ties it to the philosophy, what I consider to be a metaphysical, socio-political philosophy known as leftism, which is closely mirroring the World Economic Forum's rhetoric, even if not every element is included. I show how compassion can be weaponized. That's a big part of the leftist mentality, and try to expose the hypocrisy in that mentality and then apply it to what the World Economic Forum has laid out. There's a book that Klaus Schwab, who ran the World Economic Forum, he co-wrote, called COVID-19, The Great Reset. Anyone can read this online. So The Great Reset is an actual vision for society. It's positioned as something that's compassionate, that will help society. But I broke it down in my own 6 categories, ways in which this is not so good, in terms of culture, politics, economics, environment, i.e. the climate agenda, weaponizing concern about the climate to enact tyranny, technology, meaning transhumanism and things like it, and also metaphysics, meaning that the Great Reset is not moving us toward a more spiritual world. It's moving us more toward a nihilistic world. It's, to me, the great omission of the Great Reset is not talking about the spiritual revolution that needs to happen. So it's a book on sociology in a way. It's the way in which the dark forces, in my view, are trying to steer society in all these different directions. It's a comprehensive way of steering society. And I try to break that down in layman's terms to at least allow people to know this is what has been written. I was able to use their own words from the World Economic Forum and show how something that seems compassionate on the surface isn't always a good thing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Indeed. So,
The next,
go ahead,
yeah,
please.
the next one is an end to upside down medicine. And this challenges the allopathic approach to medicine. And to me, the allopathic approach to medicine is defined by its inherent reductionism, meaning it likes to find material causes, a single material cause to an illness,
Yes.
usually a germ, something very simplistic rather than maybe an abstraction or something more etheric that's affecting or multifactorial. And the other part of allopathic medicine is that it tends to try to alleviate symptoms rather than getting to the root cause of why people have those symptoms. And while it's true that emergency medicine, for example, and some elements of the allopathic system can be helpful in certain situations, it's a problem when that methodology is applied to try to actually make people healthy. And I break down the germ theory of disease, for example, and some of the holes in that. Very common beliefs that I'd never thought to question. Like, are there studies demonstrating that germs cause disease? Or that intracellular parasites, these little things that get inside of our cells, replicate, burst out of one cell, go into another one, cause physical symptoms in one organism, jump to another organism. I'm just describing a virus, by the way. Basic definition. Has that entity ever been observed doing all those things? No, it hasn't. So why do people believe in that entity? Well, we know that people do get sick sometimes when they're in the same place. But are there other reasons that they could be getting sick because they were maybe exposed to a common toxin that they didn't realize, or EMFs, or some kind of energetic resonance, or some kind of emotional traumatic resolution? There are many factors that could impact our health. And that's what the book gets into also, is looking at the spiritual side and other factors beyond just germs and more traditional ways of looking at medicine that could be causing disease.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The allopathic medicine, the understanding where that really comes from, was actually what my beginning journey, which is my father is the one who brought that to my awareness when I was a teenager. So he was in the medical field for years, and he had a great awareness of what was really going on, and he constantly was educating me on that when I was a teenager. Didn't fully understand it, yet that was actually my origin point of questioning what was really going on within the system. So by you saying that, just reminded, I just wanted to share that. You had asked earlier, how did you kind of start this route? It was my father, actually. Got to give that man props.
Yep, he got you thinking.
Yeah, it got me thinking for sure. So is that all the books?
So that's the sixth one. And by the way, I do talk about injections, because if germs are not causing disease, then why would you need to have an injection that allegedly prevents you from it? And I talk about the toxins in these injections and that sort of thing. My goal in the chapter on that subject was to provide a template for parents in particular who might not be familiar with this, to look at the holes in the notion of safety and efficacy that we're told, oh, it's safe and effective, to actually look at some of the data and the ways things are not being tested. So that's in the book as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the last book that was published about a year ago in 2024, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos. And this examines a very basic question. Where are we? Where do we live? Did everything start with a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago that no one directly observed? Is Earth moving? What is Earth's place in the cosmos? What is the sun's role in the cosmos? What is the nature of this realm? Is Earth an oblate spheroid shape with a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles at the equator? Should we be listening to physics based on Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton, or are there holes in that physics? Why is it that physics and cosmology are based on a model where 96% of the universe is comprised of dark matter and dark energy? And no one knows what that stuff is, and maybe it doesn't even exist. If you ask Pavel Krupa, for example, an astrophysicist at the University of Bonn in Germany, he's been saying for about a decade now, we have falsified dark matter. It's not there. And it's a kind of a problem if all of your physics relies on these things you had to plug in. And it's no wonder that the two leading theories in physics, Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics, do not work together. So there's no unified theory that matches, that can accommodate the two leading theories. As Michio Kaku said, he's a mainstream physicist, there's a crisis in cosmology. We're off by a factor of 10 to the 120th power. So basically, the foundations of physics are broken, which means, what are the lights in the sky?
Right.
Are those stars gas giants that are really, really far away? Are the lights in the sky much smaller and closer? We're so conditioned to look at things and impute a cause for why those things are happening or what they are, without examining other possibilities. So the book does not draw conclusions about what is true, but it shows that there are specific things we've been told about our cosmology that we can falsify or show that they're not yet demonstrated to be true.
Yes. Brilliant body of work. Thank you for breaking all that down and for putting in the work, the intention, the brilliance to put all this together in a series of 7 books. And I have to say, I love the title, The Upside Down, the inversion of everything we've been told, the inversion. I mean, it's brilliant. And once you go through it, then you understand the power of that title.
Well, I have to give credit to the late Bill Gladstone, who believed in me when I was just working in Silicon Valley and got a random email from me with the proposal of the book I had written. And he took me on at Waterside Productions. And he said, I love the book. The name should be An End to Upside Down Thinking. And Bill, who was a veteran in the literary world, had the foresight, number one, that I would write more books. He knew it immediately. And I said, what are you talking about? This is my one book. He said, no, you're going to write a lot of books. And he knew what you were just describing. He knew that there were inversions, that that title could be used for other books.
Yeah.
And he's been involved in Chicken Soup for the Soul. He was involved in the DOS for Dummies, so the For Dummies series. And so there was something in Bill's creativity that led him to that. So once I've come across new paradigms, I say, okay, it's just an end to the upside down whatever, and an end to upside down this. But Bill Gladstone of Waterside Productions knew.
Well, I want to thank you again, because I know what it takes to put that level of intention and creation to create something that powerful and that beautiful. It's not easy. That's a hell of a body of work. And thank you for heeding the call and moving towards that and creating this. I want to get all of it. So I want to add this to my collection. I'll catch up with you on this. I want to support you in this process.
Thank you.
I say it sincerely. I do. I want to look at it and go through all of it and see where I might be able to contribute on some other elements. Maybe there's another book that could come through. We'll see.
And you'll also see the evolution in my own thinking and where I might have said something in book 1 that I don't fully agree with. Like I talk about Einstein's general relativity in book 1, and now I question whether Einstein was right. So there are a few things here and there that I don't fully agree with, but the overall thesis of every book, I still am on board with.
Got it. Well, that's a great way to express truth and great way to express your own evolution. So thank you. Thank you for all this. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing. It was great to meet you. Great to learn more about you and look forward to more.
Thank you as well. I appreciate all the work that you do, and I look forward to learning from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Thanks, brother. Talk soon.
Sounds good.